Have I ever considered whether my children have subtly assumed control of my life as I've grown older? As I navigate my 60s, 70s, and even my 80s, the distinctions between affection, obligation, and unspoken dissatisfaction can become indistinct, particularly concerning my offspring. It might begin with affection and assistance, but eventually I find myself prioritizing my needs last, remaining silent, and forfeiting authority over my own schedule. In this presentation, I'm exploring 5 subtle yet significant indicators that I've inadvertently become subservient to my children. Not a father, not a guide, but an individual trapped in a position that no longer contributes to my tranquility, well-being, or self-respect. And here's the reason I should continue viewing. Some of these indicators might strike a strangely familiar chord, but until I identify them, I cannot alter them. And identifying them could very well assist me in reclaiming my time, my decisions, and my personal identity. Stay with this until the conclusion, because once I acknowledge these tendencies, I'll understand how minor adjustments can lead to substantial liberation, not merely from duty, but towards an existence that is still my own. Now, let us commence. Indicator 1, persistently placing their requirements before my own health. One of the most evident signs I've descended into a state of subservience is when my children's necessities consistently take precedence over my own physical and emotional welfare. It may appear commendable initially, foregoing my medical appointment because they require a babysitter, delaying my medication renewal to assist with their expenses, or driving across town while in discomfort simply because they requested it. However, over a period, this type of behavior depletes me both internally and externally. When I habitually make decisions that disregard my own body's messages, I'm not merely being magnanimous, I'm fading away. I might convince myself it's only temporary, or that it's a natural part of being a parent. But when only temporary extends into months or years, the price becomes indisputable. From a psychological standpoint, this sort of conduct can originate from deeply ingrained personal roles. Numerous older fathers have established their feeling of worth based on being indispensable. Yet, there's a distinction between being required and being exploited. The former provides satisfaction, while the latter gradually wears me down daily. And this is what renders it so complicated. My children might not even be aware it's occurring. If I never decline, they presume I'm perpetually accessible. If I never exhibit unease, they presume I'm always all right. The pattern persists not due to their unkindness, but because I've unintentionally conditioned them to think my boundaries are limitless. Take Mary, a 74-year-old grandmother from Ohio. She commenced babysitting her daughter's 3 children 5 days a week following her retirement. It was intended to be a short-term arrangement, but 5 years onward, she was still dedicating 40 hours weekly to looking after the children, thereby missing her personal book club, medical appointments, and even a much-anticipated journey with her companions. She cherished her grandchildren profoundly. However, in due course, she confessed she no longer identified with her own existence. If this resonates with my experience, it's time for me to pose a challenging yet compassionate question to myself. Am I assisting by choice, or am I driven by apprehension about the potential consequences if I ceased? That differentiation can reveal all I need to understand about my current position. When my health and tranquility are persistently forfeited for another's ease, I'm not engaging in parenting, I'm capitulating, and I merit more favorable circumstances. Indicator 2, experiencing guilt when declining requests. The second indicator is nuanced yet potent. I experience guilt each instance I say no, even if my justifications are entirely reasonable. Guilt is a typical sentiment, but when it transforms into my standard response to establishing sound limits, that isn't affection. It's a form of emotional programming. Through the years, many fathers adopt the tendency of equating no with inadequacy. They hold the conviction that if they are not present on every occasion, they are in some way disappointing their child. However, that is incorrect. That is not affection. That is guilt masquerading. Herein lies the psychological pathway. After dedicating decades to putting my children's contentment first, it can seem improper, almost self-centered, to prioritize my own. However, aging does not imply I owe them an increased amount. It signifies I've merited the privilege to regain personal space. If my child responds with dismay or irritation when I state, "not today," or "I require rest," I should ask myself, are they reacting to the boundary per se, or to the circumstance that I've never established one previously? A common adage among therapists is, the initial instance I establish a boundary with an individual accustomed to none, they will not perceive it as sound. They will interpret it as a betrayal. That is not my concern. That is their process of adaptation. For instance, consider Roger, a 79-year-old retired educator from Florida. Each Sunday, he undertook a 2-hour drive in each direction to tend to his son's lawn, reasoning, "My son is industrious, and I wish to assist." When his knees began to trouble him, he was reluctant to voice his discomfort. Ultimately, upon mentioning it, his son proposed engaging a gardener, yet remarked, "I simply assumed you enjoyed performing the task." Roger comprehended he had been enduring his discomfort silently, not due to his son's demands, but because he had failed to articulate his own limitations. If I acquiesce out of guilt rather than pleasure or readiness, that affirmative response transforms into a silent kind of bitterness. And that bitterness does not remain static. It expands. Declining when necessary does not render me a deficient parent. It makes me an authentic one, an individual who esteems himself sufficiently to decide prudently instead of being governed by duty. If I am still viewing this video and find these observations beneficial, I am invited to comment with the number 2 below to indicate my presence. And if I have not yet subscribed, it is recommended that I do so and activate the notification bell to ensure I don't miss future videos. My support aids in the continued creation of quality content designed to inform and motivate me. Now let us proceed. Indicator 3, providing financial assistance I cannot sustain. The third indicator is one that numerous older fathers succumb to without grasping its profound extent. I persist in offering financial aid to my children even when it overextends my personal resources or endangers my retirement. To be unambiguous, offering occasional help is not the problem. The difficulty arises when providing support becomes an unsustainable pattern, yet I feel excessively bound by duty or too fearful to cease. Finances are never solely about currency, particularly within family dynamics. It bears substantial emotional significance, affection, obligation, guilt, apprehension of desertion. I might reason they are facing difficulties. What sort of father would I be if I failed to intervene? However, I should ask myself this: what occurs when my generosity jeopardizes my own financial security? When I find myself reluctant to use the heating in winter merely to pay my daughter's rent, or postponing medical attention so my grandson can attend summer camp. Here is the difficult reality. Forfeiting my well-being for my adult child's ease is not commendable. It is unviable in the long term, and frequently, it does not even benefit them. It can foster dependency rather than resilience, and a sense of entitlement instead of gratitude. And it establishes a pattern conveying, my requirements are perpetually secondary. Consider Helen, 74, who discreetly discontinued her participation in her monthly walking group to conserve fuel expenses. The reason? She was remitting $300 monthly to her son, who ostensibly just required assistance to become self-sufficient. However, this assistance had persisted for 3 years. When she eventually suggested she might need to reduce the support, her son responded, "But Mom, you consistently affirmed you would support me." And at that juncture, Helen understood he did not perceive her as an individual with finite resources. He viewed her as a supply. If providing support induces stress, bitterness, or apprehension, it ceases to be genuine giving. It becomes an exchange into which I feel coerced. And that is not a method for fostering a sound relationship. I possess every entitlement to declare I must prioritize myself at this moment. I am not abandoning my child. I am merely re-entering my own phase of mature independence, a phase where my security, tranquility, and self-respect are as significant as theirs. And that is not self-centered. That is sagacious. Indicator 4, being emotionally governed by their responses. The fourth indicator is nuanced yet exceptionally potent. I discover myself altering my disposition, my choices, and even my sense of calm according to how my children respond to me. If they are aloof, I fret that I have committed some error. If they are distressed, I hasten to rectify the situation, even when unaware of my supposed misstep. If they are indifferent, I withdraw. If they are amiable, I feel relief. This sort of emotional linkage is not affection. It is a form of bondage. When my tranquility hinges on another's emotional state, I have forfeited something crucial: my equilibrium. It might have commenced decades prior when they were young children, and I was compelled to manage their environment to ensure their safety. However, they are no longer toddlers. And I am not solely their father. I am also an individual in my own right. Emotional reliance of this nature manifests in manners seldom discussed. I postpone arrangements with companions because my daughter might telephone and require a conversation. I agree to activities I prefer not to undertake, merely to prevent a sigh or silence from the other party on the telephone. I mentally review discussions, questioning if I uttered something inappropriate because they appeared displeased. And the most detrimental aspect is that over time, it erodes my self-confidence. I cease to consult my own thoughts, desires, or intuitions because I'm excessively occupied with observing their reactions, akin to a thermostat. I recall George, a 78-year-old gentleman I encountered via a community support initiative. His adult son in his 40s seldom telephoned unless he required assistance. Yet, if George failed to answer promptly, he would receive a subtly hostile message: "I suppose I will resolve it independently." And George, on each occasion, would perceive himself as a failure. A man who had participated in 2 wars and established a business from its inception diminished to a state of nervous anxiety over one unanswered call. And if that resembles an experience I have had, I am not unique in this. Numerous older fathers find themselves apprehensive about displeasing their children, treading carefully on an emotional level to maintain harmony. However, I must ask myself, what sort of tranquility is this? If it is achieved at the expense of my own peace, I do not need to secure their affection by perpetually regulating their emotions. Genuine affection does not require me to suppress my own feelings. And if my company is only accepted when I am beneficial, quiet, or compliant, that does not constitute a relationship. That is subservience. I merit the space to exist freely. That is not repudiation, that is self-esteem. If I am still viewing this video and find these observations beneficial, I am invited to comment with the number 4 below to indicate my continued engagement. And if I have not yet subscribed, it is recommended that I do so and activate the notification bell to ensure I don't miss future videos. My support aids in the continued creation of quality content designed to inform and motivate me. Now let us proceed. Indicator 5. Relinquishing my own necessities to preserve harmony. The 5th indicator might not consistently seem severe, but it represents one of the most depleting types of self-neglect. When I cease to respect my own requirements, my personal comfort, even my physical suffering, merely to prevent discord with my children, I dismiss my back discomfort so I can provide childcare. I forego meals or scheduled appointments to transport them across the city. I acquiesce when every fiber of my being silently objects, and I convince myself it is an act of love. Yet, profoundly, I recognize it as something different. It is apprehension. Apprehension of causing them distress. Apprehension of being labeled self-centered. Apprehension that if I cease my excessive giving, I will lose them entirely. This does not concern a singular act of benevolence or assistance. Every father makes sacrifices. That is an inherent aspect of the role. However, when this tendency persists into my 70s and 80s, and when my own well-being, time, and vitality are perpetually disregarded, I must question, is this still affection, or is it a state of disequilibrium? It is facile to succumb to this predicament when, for decades, my identity has been intertwined with being the one who provides. And even post-retirement, even as my body begins to decelerate, my mind persists in urging, continue. They require your assistance. Yet the reality is, my needs are important. not merely in principle but in practice. I possess the right to repose without feeling culpable. I possess the right to say "not today" without offering justification. I possess the right to prioritize my health and my tranquility, not as a recompense, but as a fundamental standard. I once conversed with a lady named Carol, 74 years of age, who had recently suffered a collapse due to extreme fatigue. She was looking after her adult daughter's 2 young children 5 days a week, concurrently managing her own diabetes and arthritis. When I inquired if she had ever informed her daughter of her tiredness, she replied, "Oh, I could not do that. She might perceive it as a lack of love for them." However, herein lies the crux. Affection does not equate to self-effacement. And if an individual only welcomes my affection when it is detrimental to me, they are not genuinely receiving love. They are, in effect, depleting me. The most challenging aspect is that the limits I failed to establish in my 50s or 60s transform into the standards I am expected to meet in my 70s and thereafter. And each instance I disregard my body's appeal for repose, each instance I suppress my own necessities to prevent causing disappointment, I am conditioning myself to believe my value is gauged by my capacity for endurance. However, I am not destined to spend my later years as a secondary figure in another individual's narrative. I have merited the privilege to live for myself without excuse, without the need to validate anything. And that commences when I cease bartering my self-worth for my children's endorsement. I am not present to serve as a buffer for everyone else's turmoil. I am permitted to occupy my own space. Final reflections. Perhaps some of the topics discussed today resonated a bit too personally. Or perhaps it simply prompted me to pause and reflect. Hold on. When did I begin to relegate my own needs to a secondary position? The reality is, numerous affectionate, well-intentioned fathers drift into this pattern without ever becoming aware of it, because it does not feel akin to servitude. It feels like an obligation, like affection, like acting correctly. However, when that feeling of responsibility begins to undermine my health, my tranquility, my sense of self, that is the moment to halt and inquire. Am I still leading my own life, or am I merely enduring someone else's? If I identified even a single one of these indicators in my own existence, I want to understand something. It is not excessively late. I can still reshape the definition of respect within my family. I can still establish new limits that safeguard my vitality. I can still reclaim my time, my expression, my value, because affection that deprives me of my liberty is not true affection. It is a state of disequilibrium. Therefore, I should be courageous enough to articulate my needs, sagacious enough to rest, and compassionate enough towards myself to begin prioritizing my own well-being. Thank you for your attention today. We would appreciate hearing my thoughts. I am invited to leave a comment below, sharing one insight gained today and how I intend to apply it in my life. My perspectives are valuable, so I should not be hesitant to express them. Reviewing my comments provides significant motivation and encouragement. If I found this video enjoyable and beneficial, I am encouraged to like, subscribe, and distribute it. My support facilitates the ongoing creation of quality content designed to inform and inspire me. Thank you for viewing, and we anticipate my presence in the subsequent video.